And last week we kind of concentrated on the what the Israelites needed to do with the Canaanites and to keep the Israelites away from the Canaanites' religion. And today we're going to move on to something a little bit different, and we're going to start out in verses 15 through 28 talking about regulations concerning blood, which I thought was pretty interesting, and did some reading and stuff I'll share with you that might give you a little bit more insight into what we're talking about. So before we go any further, I'd like for Kevin Dixon, if he would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Lord, we thank you for the time that you have given us to come here to study from your word. We ask your blessing on this class and all the classes represented, that you help us to understand how you would have us to live. We pray for those that are unable to be with us, that your healing hand will be upon them. We pray that you'll go with us, forgive us our sins, in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Okay, so let's start out by looking at verses 15 and 16. It says, "Notwithstanding thou mayest kill and eat flesh in all thy gates, whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, according to the blessing of the Lord thy God, which he hath given thee. The unclean and the clean may eat thereof, as of the roebuck and of the hart. Only ye shall not eat the blood, ye shall pour it upon the earth as water." So God explains to the children of Israel here that when they get into the promised land, that they could pretty much slaughter and eat any clean animal that's in their hometown. And from what I've read from the original text, when we're talking about here in the gates, part of it we're talking about hometown, and part of it we're talking about in the house. And they're in the original text there was a different word used for house and used for town, but the thought is pretty much the same. So basically, he's giving them a free rein to slaughter and eat any clean animal that they can, as long as they're in their town or in their home. But the thing that they've got to remember is that the blood needs to be drained from these animals. Now, one of the things we notice here, it's talking about clean and unclean, and we see this a lot in the Old Testament, and it refers to two different things. It can refer to people, or it can refer to animals. So the men and women in that time ceremonially could be clean or unclean. And there were several things that were laid out about this. One of the things that could make you ceremonially unclean is touching a dead body, whether it be a man or whether it be a woman. The other thing that would make you clean or unclean in the context of a woman, during a woman's menstrual cycle, they were considered to be unclean. And any man who had sexual relations with a woman while she was having her menstrual cycle was also considered to be ceremonially unclean. And when you're ceremonially unclean, then you're not allowed to partake of things in the temple. The other thing that we're going to see as we move on through, it talks a little bit about animals being clean and unclean type of animals. So this is discussed quite a bit in Leviticus, not quite as much in Deuteronomy. But in Leviticus 7 and 20 it says, "But the soul that eateth of the flesh of the sacrifice of peace offerings that pertain to the Lord, having his uncleanness upon him, even thy soul shall be cut off from his people." So one of the things that could make a person unclean was to eat of the meat that was sacrificed as an offering. But we see here that in these two verses, pretty much any animal that is considered clean would be something that whether they will be ceremonially unclean or ceremonially clean, they're still got to eat. So they're going to be allowed to eat, pretty much any animal that meets the criteria, as long as they drain out the blood. Now, one of I researched this a little bit about clean and unclean animals, and I think we probably need to talk about that a little bit too, because it's going to come in a little bit later on. So, according to the Torah, the land-dwelling animals that chew a cud and have cloven hooves are considered to be kosher or clean. And there's obviously there's a list that you can go through that meet this requirement. Another requirement is it has to be a mammal. Okay, so it has to be a mammal. I was researching this a little bit, and apparently I missed this in biology class. But there are 5 classes of mammals. And the mammal that is referred to here in the Old Testament is called a placental mammal, which means that there is when the offspring is born, they're born in a placenta. Human beings are born in a placenta in their mother. It's a vascular organ, and it develops during gestation, and that's where the fetus develops. This is the type of animal here that we're talking about. Now, in the list here of some of the things that fall into this classification that the children of Israel would be allowed to partake of, you've got cattle and cows, you've got bison, buffaloes, yaks, sheep, goats, deer, and antelope, all fall into this particular category. Now, in Leviticus 11, 9, and 10, it says anything, it talks about anything that comes from the water. And there are kosher fish, and there are unkosher fish. So basically, the requirement there is whatever comes from the sea or the rivers or any type of water, the 2 requirements are they have to have fins and they have to have scales. So, that's going to eliminate a shark. Shark doesn't really have scales. But there's I guess certain types of fish. I'm not a big fisherman, but I know that doesn't a catfish, it doesn't have scales, does it? Okay, so catfish would be one that would not be kosher or clean according to the Old Testament. So, I hadn't really thought about this, but when the apostles were out fishing, they were looking for a certain type of fish because they were all Jews, and they wanted to eat something that was going to be considered to be clean. So regardless of what kind of animal it was, it had to meet those criteria, and then when it was slaughtered, the blood had to be poured out because they weren't to eat the blood. Keith?
Salmon is salmon, Arctic char, West Virginia's native brook trout.
Mm-hmm.
They have no scales.
No scales.
They have a skin.
Okay. Like I say, I'm not a big fisherman. Do bass have scales, don't they? Okay.
How do you make potato chip kosher?
I don't know.
Salt baked potato chips, because they say kosher on them.
Really?
Kosher potato chips.
Huh.
Maybe it's not oil you use.
Now, there's another requirement on the animals that goes into this, and it has to be a mammal, it has to be placental, it has to have a cud, chew the cud, it has to have cloven feet. It also has to be only eat grass. That's a requirement also. If it's if it eats grass and meat, it's not kosher either. So there's quite a bit of requirements here for the Jews to kind of have to keep in mind in this particular area. Now, in case that these were killed and eaten, all this had to be. This could be done within their gate, within their city, or the dwelling. And the examples that he gave was the roebuck and the hart, and these were examples of clean wild beasts. And of course, they could be taken while they were hunting, and shot with an arrow, and then their blood would be poured out onto the ground. Now, the roebuck and the hart that it's talking about here, and the way I understand it, this hart is a deer, and these animals are present today in the Middle East, and the terms that were used in the original text, the tesbi, T-S-E-B-I, which is the roebuck, is an antelope, and the deer is A-I-Y-A-L, and that's what they refer to them over in the Middle East, and it's a deer. So what we're talking about here is antelopes and deer that are being referred to in the in the writing, and like I say, they're still found in the Middle East today. So, they did not need to slaughter these animals at the tabernacle, which God required in the wilderness, and this is talked about in Leviticus 17, 3 through 6. In Leviticus 17 and 10, it says, "Whatsoever man there be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among you, that eateth any manner of blood, I will even set my face against thy soul that eateth blood, and will cut him off from among the people." So this is a pretty serious thing that they took, very serious, to make sure that all of the blood was drained from these animals. And this is a custom still in the Middle East today with non-Jews also. When I was reading Schwarzkopf's book, It Doesn't Take a Hero, and a lot of people maybe don't know this, but Schwarzkopf grew up in the Middle East. His father, Norman Sr., was a general during World War II, and he lived in the Middle East, and he was responsible for taking care of the Caucasus Mountains, and he lived over there after the war, and Schwarzkopf spent some time over there, and they went out on a hunt, and they killed an antelope. And Schwarzkopf made the comment, he says, "I was absolutely appalled, because the first thing they did was they went and they slit this antelope's throat to drain out all the blood." Now these were Bedouins that we're talking about here, but this is still a custom in the Middle East even today about eating blood. So God saw that this was a problem, and it's a serious issue with the Jews, that if you ate the blood, then you were going to be cut off from the people. And that's something that obviously you wouldn't want to happen. Comments or questions about those two verses? All right, let's move on to verses 17 through 19. "Thou mayest not eat within thy gates the tithes of thy corn, or of thy wine, or of thy oil, or of thy firstlings of the herd, or thy flock, nor any of thy vows which thou vowest, nor free will offerings or heave offerings of thine hand. But thou must eat them before the Lord thy God in the place of which the Lord thy God shall choose. Thou and thy son and thy daughter and thy maidservant and thy manservant and thy maidservant and the Levite that is within thy gates, and thou shalt rejoice before the Lord thy God in all that he putteth thine hands unto. Take heed to thyself that thou forsake not the Levite as long as liveth on the earth." So this is talking about the offerings that are made it's going to be, of course, in the tabernacle or later on in the temple. It's not talking about the food that is given for the Levites for their subsistence. This what we're talking about here really doesn't apply to the priests, it pretty much applies to just the rank and file members. Now, we've talked about this before, where the firstborn males belong to the Lord, and so to the priests, and they couldn't eat. They're not eaten by the people, anywhere. So the priests are allowed to eat it, but nobody else is allowed to eat it because it was sacrificed to the Lord. Also, the firstlings were devoted to the Lord, and the people were not allowed to eat them even at their house, because God is going to choose the place where this is going to be done. And of course, when they established themselves in the promised land, then obviously later on the temple was going to be built, and in the interim there was going to be the tabernacle and all of that. So God was going to designate where these sacrifices were supposed to be made and how the sacrifices were supposed to be treated. There are some of the scholars that feel like this tithe that they're talking about also includes a tithe that's done every 3 years, where they lay up things at their gates that they weren't supposed to eat, but they were supposed to donate or give to the Lord. And then every so often they would carry these tithes to the temple. It's kind of like laying up treasures in heaven, like we talk about when we do the collection. Lay, buying, and store, and keeping till the time when the proper time to do it. The other thing that's kind of being referred to here is sacrificial meals. And these meals could only be held in the sanctuary. And of course the Levites were there, and they were to eat off of the food also. And it was important that the children of Israel did not neglect to feed the Levites and take care of their needs. And this was supposed to be done cheerfully and in the way that the Lord directed it to be. There's also kind of another little underlying theme here that says that the worship is supposed to be done where God designates it, and not there in the house or where you want to do it. When they were in the wilderness, this wasn't so much of a requirement because they were spread out. But once they established themselves in the promised land, God was going to designate where the people were supposed to get together and where they were supposed to do their worship. So there's a lot in those couple of verses. Comments about those verses? All right, let's look at verses 20 and 21. When the Lord thy God shall enlarge thy border, as he hath promised thee, and thou shalt say, I will eat flesh, because thy soul longeth to eat flesh. Thou mayest eat flesh, whatsoever thy soul lusteth after. If the place which the Lord thy God hath chosen to put his name there be too far from thee, then thou shalt kill of thy herd and of thy flock which the Lord hath given thee, as I have commanded thee, and thou shalt eat in thy gates whatsoever thy soul shall lust after. So the rules here still remain in force, even when God should be extended the border of the land in accordance with his promise. We've talked about this a lot. They're going to kind of be consolidated when they first move into the promised land, but then there's going to be a point where they're going to expand out. So this extension relates partly to the gradual but complete extermination of the Canaanites. This is going to be a process as they move in, and partly to the extension of the territory of the Israelites beyond the limits of Canaan. And this is in accordance with the divine promise that God made to Abraham in Genesis 15 and 18. And that says, in the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt into the great river and the river Euphrates. So we're talking about a pretty big expansion. And like Bill mentioned when he was going into this into detail, they didn't even occupy all the land that they were given by God. When you spread them all out, there was still plenty of land that wasn't used. But when they were brought into the land of Canaan, they would have a large and good pasture for their cattle. The things that were going to go away that had been in the wilderness, and there was going to be a great increase, not only in their flocks but also in the people. But still, he goes into detail, and he is very specific about the type of flesh that they can eat, and where they're going to be able to eat it. But the point is here, they can pretty much do what they want as long as they follow the things that the Lord has mandated that they do. And that's kind of one of the themes all the way through the Old Testament is, the children of Israel were going to have a lot of freedom as long as they did what God told them to do. But when they disobeyed God, then there were going to be consequences. That goes back kind of to the blessing and the curse that we talked about before. So they were pretty much allowed to eat pretty much anything that they wanted to use. But they also had to remember the oxen and the sheep and the things that were used in the sacrifice. Some of those were common food, but if it was used as a sacrifice in the temple, then it wasn't something that they could partake of, because that was dedicated to God. So it depended on what the situation was of when it was killed and what it was used for, that God was going to go ahead with that. Comments about those verses? All right, let's look at verses 22 through 25. Even as the roebuck and the hart is eaten, so shalt thou eat them. The unclean and the clean shall eat them of them alike. Only be sure that thou eatest not the blood, for the blood is the life, and thou mayest not eat the life with the flesh. Thou shalt not eat it. Thou shalt pour it upon the earth as water. Thou shalt not eat it, that it may go well with thee and with thy children after thee, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. So basically, this is a repeat to emphasize the importance of this. And there's an interesting part here. It says the life is in the blood, and that is absolutely so true. And I don't think that it's any. We made all this synthetic stuff. We got synthetic everything, but you know what? We don't have synthetic blood. The only blood that that you get comes from a human. That's something that we can't duplicate. And the life is in blood, and blood is a magnificent thing. And it sustains our life. You lose too much blood, you go into shock and you die. But it's amazing, and to actually see it. You get somebody that's in really bad shock. We give them fluid in the field, and what that fluid does is basically keep the volume going so that the heart can circulate what blood is left. But you give somebody a blood transfusion that's in trauma, if they've got the bleeding, you stop. It'll bring them back. The life is absolutely in the blood. And we can go all the way back to the Old Testament. God pointed out to those people back then that the life is in the blood. And it's just just an amazing thing. Other comments about those verses?
Even diagnostic realm, the life's in blood, because when you go to the doctor, what are they examining a lot of times? It's your blood work.
Do your blood work.
That it tells you so much about your condition.
Absolutely. And it's just there's one of the things that in the field we've got to be careful about is giving somebody too much fluid. And, based on your body weight and your size, you've got between 8 to 10 pints of blood in your body. Well, we can only give you about, at the most, a third of your body fluid in fluid. Otherwise, we'll put so much fluid in, we'll dilute your blood, and it doesn't work right. And like I say, it would be nice to be able to have actually blood in the field, because it is, the life it is there. Okay, so I'll get off the paramedic stuff. We'll get back to this other thing. Absolutely. I mean, and we talk about before, there's a difference between the blood of animals and the blood of a human. And that's, people don't think about that either, but there is a difference in the two. All right, let's move on to verses 26 through 28. Only thy holy things which thou hast and thy vows thou shalt take, and go into the place which the Lord shall choose, and thou shalt offer thy burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood, upon the altar of the Lord thy God. And the blood of thy sacrifices shall be poured out upon the altar of the Lord thy God, and thou shalt eat the flesh. Observe and hear all these words which I command thee, that it may go well with thee and with thy children after thee forever, when thou doest that which is good and right in the sight of the Lord thy God. So the law just given was to remain in force. In other words, they were to bring all their offerings to this central location of worship. Even though God would enlarge the territory after the nation had entered it, there was still going to be a place where God designated that these things happen. So this enlargement is going to take place as they gradually move and drove the Israelites out. But it would only be added whenever God extended the territory as a reward for faithful obedience to Him. And this is expounded upon quite a bit in Exodus, the 23rd chapter, verses 27 through 33. So it goes back to the blessing and the curse. When the children of Israel did the things of God in the way that God told them to do it, they were going to expand. But if they didn't do what God told them to do, then there was going to be a curse, and there was going to be consequences. And we've already, and just today we've talked a couple of times about the promise that if you do these things, it's going to be well with you, and it's going to be well with your children. So in other words, the generations coming on is going to reap the benefits of what those people did right then. And because if they don't do what God says right then, the next generation may not come. So again, it kind of infers that there's no worship in the home that can be taken place as a substitute of the worship in the temple. So it's God's plan that it be done that way, and if we follow those things even today, it's going to benefit us, and it's going to benefit our families. Comments about those verses? Okay, let's look at verses 29 through 31. When the Lord thy God shall cut off the nations from before thee, whether thou goest to possess them, and thou succeedest them, and dwelleth in their land, take heed to thyself that thou not be snared by following them after they be destroyed from before thee, and that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so I will do likewise. Thou shalt not do so unto the Lord thy God, for every abomination to the Lord which he hateth have they done unto their gods. For even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in fire to their gods. So, God had told them at the beginning of this chapter that when they go into the land of Canaan, that they're to destroy the Canaanites. They're also supposed to destroy everything that had to do with their religion. And he emphasizes it here again in verse 31. They were not to investigate the pagan religious practices.
Don't get curious.
Yeah, don't think about it. Don't put these thoughts in your mind, because if you put these thoughts in your mind, it's going to be in your mind. You're going to think, well, maybe we ought to do this, and maybe it's a better way, or it's going to make things better, or make our worship better to God, and He's going to like it more. In some ways, it's kind of like instrumental music. One of the things that you hear people say about instrumental music is, well, it makes the worship so much better, and God's going to like it that much more because the singing sounds so much better with the instrumental music. Well, the Bible doesn't say that. That's somebody's investigation, somebody's thoughts, and it's the same situation here. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to investigate what the other people did. What they did was wrong in the sight of God. He tells them here that it's an abomination. That's pretty bad when it's an abomination to God. The things that they did was bad, even to the point where they would throw their sons and their daughters and use them as a sacrifice. That's pretty bad. When you do that. So Moses is going to kind of develop this idea a little bit more in the next chapter. But the point is here, like we're talked about, worship the true and the living God, and don't worship these other gods that are out there. So this is kind of a look into the transition from worship in the wilderness to worship in the promised land. And here in verse 12, we're looking quite a bit at worshiping the true and the living God in the way that He wants to be worshiped. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to talk a little bit about the bad things about worshiping idols. So we see here in chapter 12, it opens and it closes with a warning against pagan religion. That God does not want them around it. He doesn't want it to creep into his worship service. And I think Moses probably understands this better than anybody that he's writing this to, because he was actually there when their forefathers made the graven images that was an abomination to God, and got the children of that time into the trouble that they were, and that's why they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So, we need to understand and we need to study to make sure that we are worshiping God in the way that He wants to be worshiped. Matt had that lesson here not too long ago about God's paying attention to details. We've looked at since we've been studying this, we have looked at a lot of detail. And God went into very specific detail with these people. And He wants to be worshiped in a specific way, because God is a God of detail. Do it His way. Don't add to it. Don't take away from it. And, that's what we need to do in our worship. We need to worship Him exclusively and not worship other things. And this thought of worshiping God in His way not only follows through from the Old Testament, but it comes into the New Testament also. So He makes a determination to how people should worship Him, and we need to respect that and make sure that we honor God by doing it the way that He wants us to do it. And even today, we've got to be careful about studying pagan religions and the things that they the things that they do. All right, let's finish this chapter up with verse 32. Whatsoever things soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add to thereto or diminish from. So here again we see Moses warning the people, do what you're commanded to do. Don't add to it. Don't take away from it. We're told the same thing in the New Testament also. Don't add to the Word of God. Don't take away to the Word of God. So this is a matter of